Hello, Packers fans. Welcome into PackersNews.com. I'm Kassidy Hill, joined by Pete Dougherty. As you can tell, we are not in Miami, but Pete, it's not much warmer there. The only thing that was hot today seemed to be the Packers defense. A complete shutout in the second half as the Packers defeat the Miami Dolphins 26-20. They have now won 3 in a row. They keep their playoff chances alive. Matt LaFleur improves to 15-0 in the month of December. And Pete, this is when you want to be playing your best ball. After the last 2 wins over the Bears and the Rams, respectively, we kind of we're still a little iffy on the Packers and said, well, let's see what they can do against the Dolphins. Well, we saw what they did against the Dolphins, and this was after losing Nixon and Christian Watson. Are you any more of a believer in the Packers today? Did Tua Tagovailoa just sort of give out Christmas gifts left and right in the second half with all those interceptions? What's your biggest takeaway from this Packers win?
Yeah, kind of all those things. They're legitimately back in it. They win those final 2. All they need is Washington to lose 1.
Or the Giants to lose 2.
Or the Giants to lose 2. Both of those, they may not happen, but I'd say those are 50-50 propositions. So
after everything needed to, after 4 different games broke their way yesterday.
Yeah, for sure. A couple. They made those plays in the second half and all of that. They did all those things, but I'm just kind of, one of my biggest impressions is I'm blown away that Miami gave up on the run early. They were just killing the Packers with the run. Yeah. And Tua, man, he is just so up and down. He made some bad decisions. He had that one interception to Alexander. It was a terrible decision and a bad throw, 2 for 2 on that one. Yeah. So I think Miami lost this one as much as the Packers won it, but that happens in this league, and all that matters is the Packers won, and now they are legitimately, in the race.
You said something about Miami gave up on the run, and I get what you're saying. I totally agree. However, Miami gave up on the run, really, especially after this particular drive in the third quarter where the Packers forced them to give up on the run. The first play, Mostert went off left guard, a 3-yard gain. The next play, Slayton and Clark dropped Mostert for a 1-yard loss. Next play, Tua tries to get Waddle to come back, and he catches it, but he had to come back for it. Jair knocks him out of bounds. He's short. The next play, Mostert went up the middle and got a first down, but then the next play, only a 1-yard gain. The next one was a big pass. But then, let's see, Jair stopped Mostert short for only a 2-yard gain, and then Tua was pressured by Hollins and Wyatt. And so I guess my point is, yes, they gave up on the run, but it felt like the Packers almost forced them to.
We've gone over this with, for instance, LaFleur, especially early in the year when the Packers were shorthanded at receiver. Part of sticking with the run is sticking with it when you're not getting great results. So if it's 2nd and 8, if I'm them, I'm running. If I'm the Dolphins, I'm running the ball. Yeah. If it's 3rd and 4, I think I'd probably run it. 3rd and 5, maybe even run it. It's easy to second guess these things, and coaches have reasons for what they do, and they have gained. I just thought they got away even in the first half. Later in the first half, I'd have to go back and look at the play-by-plays again, but it's just, man, I'd have just kept trying to shove the ball down their throat, and then you get those play action passes, and you carve them up. I just thought they had a chance to kind of blow the game open, and they didn't do it. And I would have stuck with the run more if I were McDaniel, even with that bad series that you just pointed out. Come back the next series, I'm not putting the game into his hands.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And on 3 straight drives, he threw 3 straight interceptions. One to Jair Alexander, one to Devondre Campbell, and then one to Rasul Douglas to seal it. The one to Jair Alexander, Pete, I don't know if you caught Jair's post-game interview with Pam Oliver.
I did not.
It was legendary.
What did he say?
She asked him to walk her through the interception. I can't even properly convey everything he said. I tweeted the video. You need to go watch it. But he was essentially like, I was thinking, oh man, okay, he's fast. Talking about Hill. He's like, he's fast. Watch him. And then I look up and I'm like, is he really throwing it? Is he really about to overthrow this? Oh no. And just called it in. And then it was hilarious. All of that to say, even Jair Alexander was shocked that Tua Tagovailoa threw that.
There were 4 guys. The guy was quadruple covered almost, and he overshot him anyway. So it was just it's just mind boggling. LaFleur, I thought was interesting afterwards. He said, we knew this was a guy who threw on anticipation, and that would give us some chances. That's what he was saying about their defense. That's his way of saying, this guy takes some risks with the balls, or throwing everything on timing like that. Sometimes you're throwing blindly. Yeah. And so the Packers obviously had a feeling coming in that they'd have a chance to exploit that. And because I think I see why the Dolphins have lost however many in a row they've lost. I mean, the guy's got ability, but you don't want to – I'd want to run the ball a lot with him and have him working off play action more than just having him throwing on first down.
Because of that is why the Packers knew that they actually could play his own defense in this game today, and it worked to their benefit.
Yeah, and all eyes on the quarterback, which that's why Douglas got that last interception.
Yes,
he just read him. Yeah, and he just dropped back a little farther than he would on that, and boom, hit him right in the chest.
Right. This is the defense Joe Barry's wanted to play all year, but then again, you're not playing a quarterback like this every week who can carve you up on one drive and give you gifts on the next 3, which is what Tua did. We've got a bunch of questions in here, and I know we haven't touched on the offense yet, but let's take a few questions. Randy says, points out Keyshawn Nixon, awesome, 96 yards on the return. And then a couple of questions about Nixon as well, which let's discuss that real quick. Yeah, Karen asked, any word on Nixon? We really need him. Keyshawn Nixon, golly, that was what? He brought it 5 yards out of the end zone. I think he returned it 93 yards or something like that, or 2 yards out of the end zone. Returned it. He got it to the 9-yard line, essentially. Just an electric play. Packers had to settle for a field goal on that drive after Rodgers took a very, very ill-advised sack.
Yep.
But still got some points. But then Nixon was pulled from the game with a groin injury. Romeo Doubs went in his place, and Romeo Doubs looked hesitant, which is understandable. This first time he's been on kickoff returns. He did it during training camp a little bit, and then when he became so important to their offense, they didn't want to risk him back there. It's a feel thing for a lot of guys that aren't named Keyshawn Nixon, who just sort of does it with reckless abandon. How serious can a groin injury be? I feel like that's something Jair Alexander had earlier in the year when he was out for a couple of weeks. And if it is something that keeps Nixon out for the next week versus the Vikings, I mean, do the Packers have an answer there with Dobbs, or are they sort of back in the same old boat at a returner?
Yeah, we really don't have any clue on the severity of the injury, so there's no point really in even, guessing about that. Groin injuries can be, bad enough where you miss a month, or even more, and they can be small enough where you play the next week. So we just don't have any idea on that one. I'm thinking if he can't play, they're kind of back closer to where they were. I mean, Dobbs is more explosive than Amari Rodgers, but he's not nearly as fast and explosive as Nixon is. And you don't see many guys who are as fearless as Nixon either. So I think that the return game takes a really big hit there. I mean, look at that. He returns the head kickoff almost for a touchdown. Then the next kickoff, they try to squib it and hit it right into one of the Packers guys up front.
All right, yeah.
Give him the ball at the 45-yard line. I mean, that's just as good as a great return.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of shows you the respect that teams have for Nixon.
He scares them.
Squib kick it to midfield than to kick it to him.
Yeah, he scares teams. That's what more can you ask for out of a return guy?
And the Packers got a touchdown on that drive where Miami squibbed it. So essentially, Nixon was the reason they scored on both of those drives.
10 points. 10 points. You set them up for 10 points. That's huge.
Exactly. While we're on the subject of injuries, Lindell asked, how was Watson? I heard he hurt his hip. We need him if we're going to beat the Vikings. Plus, Nixon would be great to have. We just addressed the Nixon part of that question. Watson left with a hip injury. Pete, do you feel like is that more precautionary just given Watson's injury history?
Again, there's just no way to know. You can't. Nobody asked about. I watched the LaFleur press conference. Nobody asked him about it after the game, and even if they had, they never say anything worth knowing after the game. I mean, once in a blue moon maybe, but they wouldn't have said anything worth knowing. So who knows? It could be exactly what you're saying, precautionary. Could be something where he has to miss a game. I would be, it's got to worry the Packers. I mean, another injury with this guy, he's such a good player, dynamic. He changes their offense, but he's been hurt more often than he's been healthy. And if you go back to, July, in those however many months that is, he's been hurt a lot more than he's been healthy.
With that in mind, how does this offense – we've seen what Christian Watson did to change this offense over the past 4 or 5 weeks. So now how does it change if he's possibly out? Craig does say great performances by Mercedes Lewis and Rasul Douglas today. Mercedes Lewis came up huge twice for them, but he's not really a Christian Watson replacement. I don't think there is a Christian Watson replacement.
I think he would be the bottom – you took all their skill players – he would be at the bottom of the list for the replacement for Christian Watson.
Oh, Mercedes Lewis. He's been in this league for longer than some of us have been watching it.
Yeah.
I will say that touchdown that he had the Packers' first touchdown. That's the second time this year they've run that touchdown to Lewis, where he kind of leaks out and gets into the back of the end zone, and it's worked both times.
I'm sure defenses just think, well, they're not, he's in there to block. They're not going to throw it to him.
Right.
So they got a total element of surprise. I wonder if they'll continue to have that going forward. Now maybe you do run it.
Yeah.
Run it away from him maybe because he's going to draw a linebacker to his side.
And then the Lewis touch, the wheel route is always open. That catch down the deep left sideline, which the rules expert on the broadcast said that it should have been reviewed and probably would have been overturned, but the Packers went really fast. They didn't get a chance to. And it never occurred to the Dolphins to challenge it because, it looked like it was caught clearly.
Yeah, they never showed a replay that suggested otherwise till they came back from commercial.
Right. They had to really look at it. So that being said, it looked fine. Wheel route's always open. As I said, Aaron Rodgers was asked after the game how many times he's thrown that ball to Lewis, and he said never, not even in practice, just messing around for fun. And Pete, I believe him because I don't think he even knew who he was throwing it to. I think he thought he was throwing it away. I don't think he would ever admit that, but he was trying to get out of a sack. And Lewis was deep down the sideline. I honestly think Rodgers thought he was throwing that ball away and didn't realize Lewis was down there to catch it.
I'm sure because I don't doubt for a second that happens. I'm thinking that he threw it to him, and what made me think that is, did you see how delicately he put that ball up there? I mean, it was just like he was. Doing, cutting a diamond or something. I mean, he couldn't have been more careful. He just laid it up there so high. I guess he could afford to because there was nobody else in the vicinity except for Lewis and the guy covering him. But, he dropped it in there perfectly. It reminded me of early in practice every day. They do those, getting everybody going when they just do an individual, drills. The tight end, the receivers will run just routes, and the quarterback's just lobbing balls, down the sidelines basically, or down the seam. And it looked like one of those throws because they're going, they're going about 90% full speed, and the quarterbacks are just lofting it out there. And that's what he did on this one. I mean, he just teardropped that thing in there.
Yeah, he did. Okay, that's a fair point. You're right about that. That being said, without Watson and I'm trying to think. No one else was injured today and left the game, but without Watson, they did have to readjust a lot of their offense. Pete, you were talking earlier about the Dolphins abandoning the run. It felt like the Packers wouldn't stick. It felt like the Packers abandoned the run getting off the bus this morning, and they didn't get to it until late in the game, when it probably should have been the opposite and started off running and then getting to the pass. What do you attribute to maybe some of those decisions?
I think, I'm not sure on this. I think a lot of it had to do with just how aggressive Miami is on defense. They blitzed a lot, and there was a lot of plays where they'd have, 5 or 6 guys at the line of scrimmage and go on one-on-one in coverage. And the Packers haven't seen that. They've hardly seen that at all this year. Everybody's been playing two-shell against them. I'm not sure what Miami was thinking there other than that's who they are, I guess. But, I would not be blitzing Rodgers like crazy. I'd sit back in two-shell and make them move it all the way down the field and get it in the end zone. It's worked for a lot of teams this year. So I think that might be the biggest reason why. I'm not sure. And Jones, obviously was having some ankle issues because he hardly played in the second half. So that was probably part of it. But you know what they did? One of the things you give them credit for, they get the ball with 6 minutes left. They burned off 4 minutes and got 3 points. That was huge.
This is 2 weeks in a row that they've really been able to burn off clock time when they needed to.
That's hard. That's tough to do.
Right, and in much different ways. This week, it was sort of a 4-minute offense and not a hurry-up 4-minute, but a slow-down 4-minute. Last week, it was a 9-minute offense, which is something you have to be able to do, especially late in these games. You're talking about the blitz. This is per ESPN Stats and Info. The Dolphins blitzed Rodgers on 26 dropbacks. That's the most he's been blitzed in the game since Week 15 in 2017. He finished.
Wow, that's 5 years. I mean, wow.
Yeah. He finished against the blitz with 192 yards and a touchdown, his second most passing yards against the blitz over the last 5 seasons. So one of those days where he just kind of reminded you, hey, I'm still Aaron Rodgers. I'm still a 4-time MVP.
It reminds me of a season way back in the early 2010s when the Packers, it was really early in the year, and the Packers were struggling. They might have been like 1-2 or something. They were struggling early. They go down to Houston. Mm-hmm. And every team that they've been playing, might even been later in the year, and every team that they've been playing was sitting back in 2 shell, and the Packers were really struggling. And Houston came out, Wade Phillips came out with this blitz crazy game plan, and Rodgers just torched them, and that got the Packers offense going for the rest of the year. And it was just like, what was he thinking coming after him like that, when that's what he wants? That's when he's at his best, is when you blitz him.
Trying to see if we've got let's talk about special teams for a minute. I know we talked about Nixon, but let's talk about the other parts. Mike asked, why is Mason not able to kick the ball out of the end zone? Do you think some of that is age, or some of that directional kicking and choices?
Oh, I'm pretty sure most of it is he's, 39 years old, 38, 39? Yeah, he's just lost some of the juice in his leg. If I'm sure in a couple of those situations, if he could, they would have rather had him just knock it 8 yards or more deep in the end zone. So I think it's mostly age. That would be my guess.
He did today break Brett Favre's record for most consecutive starts in Packers franchise history. So,
that's got to be appalling for a guy who's playing every snap to be tied by a kicker for that. I mean, it's great that kickers can get hurt too, and he's kicked through some injuries. So I mean, I don't mean to minimize it. You got to be good. You got to be good to stick around that long, but still.
And kickers don't necessarily have the longevity that they used to anymore. And so for someone to stay with one franchise, even if it is a kicker for that long, is impressive.
What do we have going on there?
I think somebody just drove up. So the dogs are letting us know they're here. I'm gonna ask you one question and put myself on mute real quick. Pete, are you a bigger believer in the Packers today than you were yesterday?
Then yesterday, yes, because they went down and, regardless of how it happened, they beat a pretty decent team that had a lot of talent on offense. I still think these are winnable games coming up, but I still think not having Rashawn Gary is going to end up biting them in one of these last two. But I mean, their chances are way, way better than they were yesterday.
Sorry, I was just letting the dogs quiet down here for a second. This has been a really, really, just a sec, Peter. This has been a really, really impressive season from these rookies. We've seen Dobbs, we've seen Wyatt, we've seen Quay Walker come in. We're seeing more and more flashes from Devontae Wyatt whenever he does get in the field. Mm-hmm. But as Bill asked, how can we give more snaps to Wyatt, his impressive performance? Why has he not been on the field more? Especially, it felt like, I think today it took Dean Lowry getting hurt for Wyatt to be on the field more.
It did. I think he's really only been showing for, maybe 3 weeks here. I thought before then, and I go back and rewatch these games, and if he played 7 snaps, if he got double teamed on 2 of them, he just got blown out of there. Or even single blocked, there would be at least 1 snap single block where he'd get, moved out of the hole much more easily than you can afford to have a guy get moved out. But he had a double team last week where he stood his ground, and I'll know more after rewatching the game tomorrow. But he had a couple pass rushes today, and he looked a lot better. Part of it's maybe he just needed more playing time, but he probably needed some of the seasoning and the coaching that he's gotten all season too. But yeah, I guess I'm guessing we'll be seeing more of him over these last 2 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, and it feels like that's been the case with several personnel changes this year. It took an injury for coaches to sort of make the change that maybe needed to have been made a week or two earlier, and that could
could be, yeah.
Last thing, this is kind of based off Mitchell's comment here. It says, I surely hope the Packers will establish the run, stick with the run, build a lead, and keep Minnesota offense on the sidelines. Pete, it feels like, in my opinion, that the Minnesota Vikings are not as good as their record. But, I also wouldn't necessarily say that means the Packers are better than them. But getting this game in January at Lambeau Field, the Packers again knowing that their backs are against the wall, do you feel like this is, after what you saw today versus Miami, do you feel like that's a winnable game for the Packers next week versus the Vikings?
Oh, definitely winnable. If I had to make a pick right now, I'd still probably go with the Vikings. I mean, there is a certain element of good fortune in winning all those close games. I mean, you're doing things you got to do to win too. So they're probably not quite as good as their record, but they got a ton of talent on offense. They have a quarterback who can get scorching hot, but who can also make some huge mistakes. So maybe they can induce that out of him next week too. It's just as good a chance of that as there is that he'll go off for 350 yards or more. But I think Mitchell's got it exactly right, man. You got to run the ball and keep those guys, keep Cousins and Jefferson and Thielen and Cook off the field.
And Hawkinson.
Yeah. What do you have? What do you have? 12 catches or whatever on Saturday, I think it was.
Something like that. Well, guys, thank you all for sticking with us through a pretty crazy weekend. It's going to be crazy anyways when it's the holidays, but as you can tell, weather kept pretty much all of us from Miami. I think our colleague Ryan Wood made it to Miami around 4 a.m. this morning. So he'll have coverage for you, wrap-up coverage for you from Miami. Rest of us didn't get to make it, but it worked out, as you can tell. I'm in Alabama with my family. Pete, I hope you had a Merry Christmas as well. We will continue to have wrap-up coverage for you from the Packers' huge win versus Miami, staying in playoff contention. The Green 19 podcast will be coming to you tomorrow. We're going to take a little bit of time this afternoon to spend as much as we can with our family and friends to finish off this Christmas day. Pete, thank you so much as always.
Thanks, Kassidy, and happy holidays. Merry Christmas to you.
Thanks, guys. See y'all next time.